Hey guys, Magna back here for some more Community Starcraft 2. Today we're going to be taking a look at some ZvZ scouting and figuring out what your Zerg opponent is doing and see how you can kind of outmaneuver them, outplay them in little ways to gain advantages in what otherwise seems like a very wishy-washy matchup. This is going to entail a lot of scouting information that's not necessarily seen in these replays. I'm going to give you guys a few tips that you can use in your own games that you don't see too often in the pro games, because the reads that they get and the way they play ZvZ is a lot different than the way ZvZ is going to come down mostly on the ladder for everybody else. So we'll be looking at those kind of replays, but I'll be showing you some different things that you can check out as well. We're going to go ahead and jump into the game here, though, and we're going to be watching Symbol versus Hydra. Of course, the first thing that you want to do always is send out your first Overlord. This is usually going to negate the need for drone scouting, considering it usually gets to your opponent's base by the time they would normally have a hatchery down anyway. So this first Overlord is just going to go straight to the natural expand area. After you check that, you can even just fly it around like right here, and then kind of turn it into the main base and make sure that they're not mining gas or anything crazy like that, so that you can further diagnose what's going on. You can see Symbol just stacking his workers a little bit right here, but yeah, so the first Overlord's basically going to check the natural expand area, and sometimes, most of the time, we'll fly into the main, because the only deterrent to Overlords throughout the game is going to be Queens for the most part. So Overlords are going to get you a majority of your scouting information as the game goes on. So we'll just go ahead and fast forward here as we see the Overlords floating out. And seeing your opponent's Overlord doesn't really matter unless it's a 4-player map. So if you pass your opponent's Overlord on a 4-player map, then you'll know where they're spawned. That's about the only use that that has. So both players are going to get to their opponent's expands. You can see that Symbol's going hatch first and Hydra's going pool first. So the Overlord for Hydra should get there, and it should see how much progress is done on this hatchery, and you'll eventually get used to what hatchery timing that was versus when your Overlord gets there to see it and how much progress is on its health bar and whatnot. But I mean, that's not overly important. Hatch first really only guarantees you about 1 extra drone versus a pool first, so I mean, I don't know, it doesn't really seem that useful, and I've told people throughout the course of these videos that you should really just open up pool first in ZvZ, because it keeps you so much safer against a lot of really weird stuff you see on the ladder. Pros will often open hatch first because it offers safety against a little bit later timings, but those timings are super crisp, and I don't think you'll have to worry about that too often in your own games. So we won't pay too much attention to that. Of course, your second Overlord is going to be your second scouting tool, so you're usually going to want to send in your first Overlord, and you can see from Hydra's point of view, he sees the hatchery, and just like we talked about, only it's reversed, he just flies straight into the main. You want to check for gas mining here, because things like Zergling speeds, maybe a baneling attack are going to be prevalent. There also are some ZvZ styles where they don't take gas for quite a while, and they just play with some queens and wall off and use spine crawlers and whatnot. So if that were the case, you could rule out things like baneling attacks, roach attacks really quickly, Zergling speed being out super early, stuff like that. But if the gas is being mined, then you have to say, alright, well, all those are a possibility, and I need to make sure I'm safe against all those, because I might not be able to check with my Overlord for quite a while to re-verify if there's any like baneling nest coming down or something. So the first Overlord is doing its job. The second Overlord is really just going to sit somewhere outside of the natural, maybe like right here, so that you can see units moving out across the map. So when it's time and when units are coming across, you can spend your larva to defend what they're sending. So this is the second little thing you can do, just to double check, and this is really useful especially if they're mining gas. Your first pair of Zerglings should be seeking to try to get into your opponent's base, considering it's super hard for them to actually prevent this from happening. The only real way they can do that is by like hold positioning some units on the ramp here so that the Zerglings can't get in, but then you leave drones down here exposed. So especially against somebody that's mining gas, use your first pair of lings and just walk them in, take a lap around the base and walk back out. You're going to get tons of information, you'll know exactly what's going on. And right now, Hydra knows that Symbol is researching Zergling speed. He also knows there's no baneling nest or anything else on the way, so he shouldn't have to worry about that for a little while. And also he knows that there's no gas mining going on right now. So anything like a really fast roach attack, anything like a baneling all-in is really not that plausible right now. But Hydra being really diligent and following up is going to give him a lot of information. So I guess from this perspective, most of the scouting information is going to be coming on Hydra's end, considering Symbol is playing the more aggressive style. And this is what I was talking about. There are some styles where you don't take gas for quite a while and you just defend with queens and spines. That's exactly what Hydra's doing. So I guess it'll kind of outline that that's a possibility in ZvZ as well. So now this is one tricky thing that Symbol does, and this is why you need to continue to re-scout, because as soon as Hydra's Zerglings left, Symbol just went right back to mining gas and he dropped a Baneling, or rather a Roach Warren. So this is very alarming. You want to definitely make sure that you know what's going on here, and at the very least you want to make sure you have an Overlord sitting around here somewhere so that when units start coming across the map you have enough time so that when they have to walk all the way across you can say, well, at least I caught it here and I didn't catch it here. If you caught it here, you'd have to wait for your units to produce and you'd probably be dead by the time they would come out anyway. But if you can catch it back here, a lot of times you have larva cycles that'll finish up in time. You can get units out that'll just barely make it out in time to deal with that. So that's just definitely very important in this matchup. So these two Zerglings are being chased away by Symbol's Zerglings. That's kind of why they couldn't have turned around. But if you could have managed it, you could actually split those off. So you send one home and then maybe loop one back around back into the base here. Because Hydra with no gas, you're never going to be aggressive with no gas. There's no reason to do that. It's purely a defensive build considering you have no options. You can't win with like slow Zerglings, especially if they have things like Banelings or Roaches. So since your only goal here on being on no gas is to defend yourself, you need to find ways to turn this Zergling around, maybe loop it back around here, and get it back into the main base if you can help it, because if you saw him re-mining gas and you saw this Roach Warren coming down, you'd know exactly what's going on. You'd be like, alright, well this is pretty obvious that you're mining more gas. This stage in the game, there's like no drones here, only 2 drones. So it's clear that you want to gear up for some type of aggressive attack. Now regardless, something that you can do if you don't have full information is you can start to wall off and make extra queens like Hydra's doing. And then once you create the wall, it makes it really hard for them to get any sort of surface area on any of your units. And that way you can put a couple of spines back behind your wall, and we'll actually see Hydra start to assemble this. You see the Roach Warren coming down now. Evo Chamber, you can even throw down another Evo Chamber right here, or there, whichever one you want to do. And it really limits the surface area here, and it's only because he's playing cautious like this that he's able to pull this off. So his scouting was good so far, but even if you can't get that scout for whatever reason, I wanted to demonstrate that there are ways to keep yourself safe, and that is by creating walls like this, making a lot of queens, making extra spines, being really diligent about that. And you should have noticed that this Overlord was in position to see these roaches cross, and right now Hydra had these drones in queue before he saw those roaches, but he knows all about them now, so every unit from this point out should be coming from these larvae, should just be nothing but Zerglings, Roaches, whatever else he can afford. His Roach Warren obviously isn't done right now, but even Zerglings just to help buffer, or even throwing down extra spines since he does have the extra money, is going to help him out against this. And you can't mess around against stuff like this. You need to, if anything, overcommit to defending it, otherwise you could die to something really silly. So, because he's able to play this really conservative style and defend and be covering all of his bases just in case something like this is happening, and of course you can keep an eye on your Overlords to see if stuff is continuing to rally down. So if this is just like 5 roaches or whatever and that's it, you don't need to make like 30 spines. I mean, just make enough to hold that, but your Overlord can continue to sit here and watch for more units rallying forward. So these forward Overlords are worth a lot. So we're going to see Symbol rallying up here. Of course, Hydra has a full wall now, 1 spine in there, and since you have so many queens, you can just transfuse the spine if it starts to get hurt. So here we go. And you can also tank with these queens as well. They can heal each other. They have a lot of utility in these type of gasless builds. So he unfortunately does let stuff through, but the battle doesn't really matter at this point. I mean, he's really taking care of it. These 7 roaches coming out right now, in combination with the good walling and the queens to support, as well as being willing to throw away a few drones here and there to try and defend this, will help him out immensely. So now that the roaches are out, I mean, this is pretty much no contest. He can re-wall this at any time. He can move his spine crawler forward. He needs to not lose his Roach Warren, obviously, but either way, this is pretty much over only because Hydra was being diligent enough to stay safe from everything that he couldn't possibly scout. He did have an opportunity to re-scout if he wanted to, but this is a pretty weird timing that you're seeing that assemble. But this is the kind of stuff you're going to see on ladder every once in a while too. So just to show you guys some closure in this game, this continues on for just a little while, but considering Hydra has a little more drones, 30 to 21, he's able to bolster his army much better than Symbol can, and Symbol just eventually fails and dies at this. So you can even see in the supply differences, even he has a way bigger army and more drones. So this game is pretty much over. But yeah, that's just basically the basics of early game ZvZ scouting. Now we can jump into more mid and late game stuff and little tricks that you can employ to get information at those stages of the game, because that can be a really difficult part to examine. So we're going to be taking a look at life versus dark, which is an interesting pairing of names there. I don't know what else to say while this game loads, but I think we're going to look at this mostly from the viewpoint of life. Considering life is the master as far as Zerg at figuring out what his opponent is doing and finding very unconventional ways of countering that. And by unconventional, I mean like these are things that nobody really does, but they're extremely what's this word I'm looking for? Intelligent. Jeez, I clearly have none of the intelligent, but so life is just going to be opening up fairly normal here. I can't remember if he opens pool or hatch first. Yeah, pool first. That's definitely what you want to do. Both of these guys opening pool first. And just to explain the pool first reasoning once again, if you haven't seen any of my other videos, is the hatch first basically nets you 1 extra drone in difference from this build. And it exposes you to a lot of things like big drone pulls. Early pools can get you way behind if you go hatch first, because your Zergling is going to be so late. You're going to lose a lot of drones in the meantime. It's just, the hatch first is just not worth the risk, in my opinion. It may be worth the risk in the pro levels, especially if they study their opponent a lot, but at your level on ladder, just don't do it. It's just not usually that profitable. So Life's Overlord's getting in here. He does see that Dark has gas. We know that Life does not have gas, so this is kind of similar to what we were seeing before. So Dark having that pretty early gas, Life needs to consider, okay, well, what if he opens up with Banelings or Zergling Speed or Roaches or something like that? I need to have answers to that, but I need to also follow up with my first pair of scouting lings to make sure that I know what's going on. So first couple lings coming in here, sees a hatchery finished. Fortunately, or rather unfortunately for Life, Dark's Queen is out. You can see some cute Zergling micro here. Dark's Queen is out, so he could have maybe stopped both of those, but even still, I think that may have been worth the risk. But this is the kind of map where he took the gas geyser. This might have actually been a mistake here from Dark, but either way, Life could see it. If it's close enough to the edge, you can just, whoops, I don't know what was up with that. You can just float your Overlord back in here and see if they're still mining gas. So if Life comes back in here, he can just move his Overlord to like right there and still maybe barely get it away from the Queen in time, but just re-verifying that he's mining gas or not is a big deal. So in response, Life knows that Dark is mining gas. He's just going to throw down a blind spine crawler, and he may go into this walling type of style if he needs to, like we saw from last game. It protects you from a lot of different things. But either way, he needs to be prepared for holding off any sort of aggressive all-in, especially if he can reconfirm that gas is being mined. I don't think there's a way to tell from this point. But secondarily, one thing I wanted to say that you don't see very often in pro games, but it's really valuable to do, is if you can manage to get a second Overlord beyond the natural, like say float it back around here, or even your third Overlord and float it back around here, you can keep an eye on the amount of drones that are at the natural, and this is something that not a lot of people look for. You can just float it in periodically, and if you're especially worried about some sort of 2-base all-in or timing or something, if they have very few drones at a time where you have a lot of drones at your natural, then that's a really obvious tell to say, well, there's something coming and I definitely need to spend all my larvae on units rather than drones from this point forward until I start to see more at this natural. So that's one of the tricks you can use. We're not seeing anything too crazy here out of Dark, but I do want to continue to monitor this, and this is a really fast lair as well. So this would be another circumstance where you would maybe be able to transform this into an Overseer eventually and see the lair timing, but Dark's lair is going to be so fast, Life really needs to try and get on top of this, maybe try to run in a couple of pairs of Zerglings and see what he can find out. But at this point, both these players are playing pretty normal. Pretty passive Roach style. Both of them are going to be taking a third base. You can see Dark taking a third right now. So from this point, we need to know, both players need to know about this. So Dark does, oh wow, I pressed the wrong button. Either way, it's still in the same spot. So we can see that Dark does not know about the expansion because his Overlord's not close enough, whereas Life knows. So like we were talked about in other videos, specifically the ZvZ strategy video, there's a point where both players are trying to take their thirds that they can easily be cancelled if one of them does not make Zerglings at this phase. So usually you'll take your third base, make a bunch of Zerglings, or in this case you may be able to make Roaches and hold it off, which is what Dark's idea is. But if you don't make enough and you get surrounded by Zerglings, then all of a sudden you lost your army and a base. So this is the stage where Life knows he's at this stage. He knows his opponent's taking a third base. He's just making these Zerglings blindly. and it's going to have a lot of utility for him, especially since he has so much map information as well. So this is one thing you don't want to do. You don't want to get too greedy at this stage of the game, and you want to make sure you understand what's going on with your opponent as well. He finally does see the hatchery, but you could see it's huge by the time that he knew. So he might not have known that the whole Zergling stage was happening as quickly as it was, and this is going to cost him a lot because he has roaches in queue, but his roaches aren't in the right position. Life gets a pulse round on the base, and he can sacrifice some Zerglings just to kill this. That's no problem. So he's got it, and he can just walk away now. So Life, because it was able to have that information a little bit earlier than Dark, gains a huge advantage now because he was able to manage to squeeze out a few drones while making those Zerglings. You can see that Dark is still making roaches. Now all Life really has to do is not die to the counterattack, and even intercepting little bits of roaches like this is going to be great. This is another point where he knows that because he canceled that base, Dark may be super aggressive in trying to recover to that. He can continue to rescout and see if this third is being retaken, but most of the time it won't be because he's so far ahead right now. And he'll know that, okay, well, I just have to make nothing but units right now, and I need to plant some spines, maybe even make more spines to try and hold this off, because it'd be silly if I got an advantage like that, like killing a third base, and then died to him just sending his army across the map. So we're going to see Life recover from this slowly but surely. You can see him constantly repositioning, pulling extra queens down here. The more time he can buy, the better shape he's going to be in, because he does have an economic advantage right now. But defensively, Roach versus Roach, you will always have an advantage if you're the defender, because your rallies are just right next to the fight, whereas he has to walk all the way across the map. So you can see Roach is rallying in from way down on the other side. So Life in a really good position right now, and it seems so silly, but it really came down to him seeing that third hatchery within a good amount of time, and Dark not. So Life knew it's the time to make Zerglings, and it's the time to be aggressive out on the map, and Dark didn't quite know yet. So he tried to get into roaches, he tried to produce a few extra drones he probably shouldn't have, and he got caught and busted for it. And because Life is able to hold off this counterattack, at least eventually, he's going to be way ahead, and that's basically game over. So from this point, the only things that you probably need to reconfirm is you do need to make Overseers, at least a couple, because for one, gooping up upgrades right now is getting really popular, and it's really strong, especially in Roach versus Roach. But secondly, they're just such fast scouts, and you can double check everything that's going on in the matter of seconds if you have Overseers, and you can drop changelings and run in there and figure out what's going on as well. So that's basically from that point on, your Overseers are going to be your strongest scouting tool. And the only things you really need to look out for, especially if you do get into Roach versus Roach, which is overwhelmingly the most common scenario in ZvZ, is what are they supporting their roaches with? Whether it's infestors, sometimes it can be swarm hosts, and you need to know that if they're going into swarm hosts, you need to just go right away. That's pretty hard to identify the difference between that and infestors, though. So you can kind of walk around the map a little bit and double check his composition. If you see swarm hosts, you can switch right away into something that counters that. They may support it with hydralisks. Very, very, very rarely you'll get into situations where hive is appropriate, but then you can check your opponent's hive timing. You can check to see what their units are that are going to be coming up after that, which is almost always Broodlord as well. But I mean, just staying on top of what's going on with Overseers and with Changelings, and especially gooping important buildings like the Evolution Chamber, maybe even hatcheries if you're in a close fight, is a really good idea. But from this point forward, all you need to know is in ZvZ is that you can get information with your Overseers, and secondarily, you want to make sure your economy, or rather your drone count, doesn't get ridiculously high. If you're up around 80 and they have a drone count of like 50 and you fight max versus max, you're probably going to lose. So don't go too high on drones, maybe 55 or 60, but by this time, 11 minutes or so, you should be past the point of drone production anyway. So yeah, basically just rely on your Overseers to get any sort of information that you're going to see throughout the rest of the game. And the rest of this game isn't terribly interesting. Life just has a huge economic advantage, and he gets a huge supply advantage and just wins with a lot of roaches. So that's how a lot of ZvZs end, and I guess that's how we will end this video. So from this point forward, I'm going to be doing more specialty situations in games that people struggle with. The whole idea is I want to be able to answer basically any question that a newer player would have. So I think the next ones are going to be about how to stop certain attacks in certain matchups, and different types of styles that you can use that are really strong in different matchups and whatnot. So look out for that, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.